Let me start by answering whether Pakistan is to be blamed or not for the flooding that occurred last year. It's not a straightforward yes or no answer, in my opinion. Yes, Pakistan is partially responsible, not for primarily causing or exacerbating climate change, but for its own lack of climate resilient infrastructure in place to tackle these climate-induced catastrophes that they're experiencing, right? Especially since climate change models had been predicting more intense rainfalls and weather events in countries like Pakistan, Pakistan should have been more prepared. I'll dive more into this later. Before jumping into that, let me just share very, very high level why this phenomena is occurring. To begin, life on Earth depends on energy coming from the sun, right? Animals, plants, land, and ocean absorb the solar energy needed to survive. They absorb what's needed and reflect the rest of that back into space. That's kind of how nature is supposed to be working. Pre-industrialization, nature was in balance. This excess heat was being radiated back into space. CO2 and methane are naturally occurring gases in the atmosphere, and they were somewhat at manageable levels. However, post-industrialization and burning of fossil fuels, it created an imbalance in this process. And we started releasing more and more carbon into the atmosphere. CO2 concentration, methane concentrations multiplied, and greenhouse gases essentially formed a blanket around the Earth. And they started trapping the sun's heat instead of letting it go back into the stratosphere. This has essentially led to warming of our planet. We are at 1.1 degrees Celsius higher temperature compared to pre-industrial era. So what's happening with this? What are the effects of this global warming? As more heat trapping gases are getting pumped into the atmosphere, planet temperature will increase, more water will evaporate from the oceans, hotter air tends to hold more moisture as well. So all of this will lead to extreme weather-related events like flooding. This will lead to more heat waves, like the one that Europe experienced. More mega droughts will occur, something that California has been experiencing over the last few years. There will be crop failures, species extinction, food production will be impacted, water insecurity will rise. So overall, these are the effects of climate change, and that is what we're seeing in countries like Pakistan and elsewhere as well.
Okay, so basically it is a global phenomena, and I guess the key takeaway from your description is the fact that countries who are higher ahead in the trajectory in terms of industrialization, who embarked upon that, that trajectory, that journey back in the 18th, 19th centuries, they are and should be more responsible, and they've contributed towards greater carbon emissions. High-income countries much more industrialized than those such as Pakistan, and nations which are still at the moment in the developing phase. So when you're talking about adapting to these climatic and global changes, obviously there's a need of investment, and countries like Pakistan, who are already facing a financial crunch, they're in the midst of various economic issues. And I'm just looking at the numbers in front of me. The recent floods of 2022, they led to damages accruing a total of $14.9 billion. Additionally, on top of that, the economic losses were estimated to be 15.2 billion. And the estimates as per the World Bank for rehabilitation and resilient construction was around 16.3 billion. So for a country which is at the moment is negotiating for deals as little as $1 billion, it is practically impossible for them to come up with these sources of financing that would help them deal with the impacts and the repercussions of climate change, which is a global phenomenon. And Pakistan being a country which is contributing less than 1% of carbon emissions towards the global cap, I believe it is right to assume that they should not be held responsible. On that note, I would pivot the discussion towards you, Sundas, and really ask you, what are multilateral organizations, what are these high-income countries doing in terms of for not compensating the losses, but ensuring that climate justice is being done? because many countries are paying the prices of their actions that they had embarked upon many, many years ago, decades ago, centuries ago. Our foreign minister, Pakistan's foreign minister, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, is actually advocating the same. He talks about climate reparation. He's going from one country to the other, and he's putting forth this agenda, this discussion, that this responsibility should be more shared, or actually the burden should be borne by countries who contributed towards this catastrophe. So this, what are your viewpoints? What is being done on the climate financing front? What more can be done, and how important is it for these countries to acknowledge the events that are happening elsewhere in the world?
Thank you, Norris. This is an incredibly sensitive and complicated issue, because climate change is very, very unique in the sense that it not only is impacting developing countries like Pakistan in a manner, even within Pakistan, the impacts aren't felt equally across the whole society. So the poorest and most marginalized, such as you can think of small farmers, rural communities, women, elderly, they are often the ones who bear the brunt of the climate change the most. And they're also the ones that are least protected from the impacts of climate change. So definitely this is a big issue of climate justice, and efforts to promote climate justice have been generally on the rise in the global community. In fact, one of the major impetuses of the 2015 climate conference in Paris was to address this, where world leaders came together to commit US $100 billion annually to combat climate change. Now, in reality, I believe only a fraction of that amount has been mobilized. One other point to note is that often in the context of global climate finance flows, climate mitigation is seen as a global public good. It is seen as exactly the science that Nimra just laid out, that when one country or one set of countries is emitting, another set of countries is also facing the brunt of that. So keeping that in mind, climate mitigation was often touted as being the key global public good that needed investment. And a lot of work has gone into supporting renewable investments, for instance, supporting other countries to move towards a low carbon pathway. It's only very recently, in very recent years, and Pakistan has come as a really big example with the most recent floods, that now the international community needs to step in for climate adaptation as well. The numbers that you mentioned, I mean, more than 30 billion in economic losses for a country like Pakistan, it's just not possible for Pakistan to mobilize those numbers within itself. But I will not absolve Pakistan of its own responsibility as well. So definitely stressing the point that we, as Pakistanis, need foreign direct investment to not only a one-off event. We will need sustained flows in order to support the communities, in order to support people-centric climate adaptation, which is also something that's a little bit different from the way the international community has thought of climate adaptation in the past. But within Pakistan, we will also need to be receptive. We will need to have a financial system. We need to have a systematic response to this. We need to align our financial flows to go where they're needed most. We will also need to mobilize domestic revenue, whether that comes from taxes, how that's done, that's a separate story. But we need to improve the efficiency and the targeting of our investments that go towards climate change. And then we as South Asia, especially countries around the Indus Basin, will need to come together, because we have very similar risks when it comes to natural disasters. And if we are able to set up a system where we can pool in our human resources, our technological resources, our financial resources, I think we will be able to kind of hedge the risks that are coming up from climate change in a better way.